Welcome to HortTube, where we talk all things gardening. My name is Jim Putnam, and this is episode 6 in my Backyard Plant Propagation series. Today I'm going to be showing you the soil components and the flats and the materials that we're going to need when we get started on actually taking cuttings later in the spring. Thanks for watching. The materials that we'll be mixing together to put into our flats are number one, peat moss, which is a mined organic product. It holds a tremendous amount of water. It's incredible capacity for soaking up water and holding it. And it's very light and airy unless you compress it like this. This bag is very, very heavy in these 4 cubic foot bags. The other thing we're going to be using is perlite. Perlite is a volcanic material. Also buy this in big bags like this. Is a 4 cubic foot bag as well. There's almost nothing that you can't root 50% peat moss and 50% perlite if you're rooting the cuttings at the appropriate time. And most woody shrubs sometime between May 15th and July 15th, when the wood on the plant has not hardened off completely, but it's hardened off enough that it's not too pliable. That works fantastic. I like a little bit of extra drainage in my soil media. So I typically will mix in some sort of pine bark soil conditioner is what I used to use. I actually have a kind of a secret ingredient I use now, which is peanut hulls, which I buy in a very large truckload every year. We use it to mix into several of our soil mixes at the nursery. That's not something that's going to be available to you, so you can use the pine bark soil conditioner, which is this material here. This is just a ground up pine bark. It's available at most of the box stores. The only problem with it is there's some typically a little more chunky wood material in it. I actually have a screen at the nursery that I put on top of a wheelbarrow, and I'll put that bag on top of that screen and I'll just screen through it and make sure I get out the largest material. And we will actually mix a third peat moss, a third perlite, and a third pine bark soil conditioner. So the next thing we're going to need after we have our soils is you need a very good pair of pruners, and I will take a pair of pruners. This is almost a disposable pair here. It's just a little pair of snips. It's easy on the hands. I showed them in the first episode of this series. These are very good. I'll wear them out in a season and pretty much dispose of these. They're very inexpensive and easy on the hands, but it's a Corona. I'll link these in the description below. I use liquid rooting hormone. This is Dip and Grow, which you can get on Amazon. I'll link this in the description below. This is pretty much exactly what we use when we mix our own, but it's exactly the same as Dip and Grow, really. It just saves me a little money to do it in-house. But this, I think, this size bottle, it's a 16 ounce bottle, so I think this was $49. You can get a 2 ounce bottle if you're only planning on rooting a few things this season, and I think it's $12. I'll link both of those in the description of this video. So those two things are very important. We definitely want to use a new pair of pruners. Don't use a rusty old pair of pruners, and don't use a pair of pruners that you've been pruning on everything in your yard. You definitely need to clean them or get them sharpened if you are going to continue to use that pair. But I would get a new pair if you're serious about doing quite a few cuttings in a season, and get a disposable pair. The next thing we're going to need is, this is a 50 cell flat here. This is actually a stack of 3 of them. This is, by 50 cell, I mean it has 5 places to put cuttings there by 10 here. So this is a 50. We'll use 50s and 60s depending on what we're rooting at the nursery. If they need a little more space, we'll use these 50s. I use a very sturdy flat, and I'll link some of these as well. Amazon has a few options for sturdy flats. And what I mean by sturdy is I don't really need to use a tray with it. If I have to put it in a tray, if it's a very flimsy plastic, you have to have a tray as well. We do use these trays, and the way we actually use these trays is we put them upside down, and you'll see this when I start putting cuttings in that hoop house. I'll put a tray like this upside down, and then I'll put my tray of unrooted cuttings on top of that, creates some air movement underneath it, prevents any disease that might be on the floor from splashing up on our cuttings. But we'll do that throughout our entire commercial greenhouse, and you'll see me do the exact same thing when we're doing this backyard plant propagation. So I'll link these as well. These are inexpensive little mesh trays. If you save these when you buy annuals during the spring, just put these away and you can reuse them that way to keep your plants, from being directly on the ground. So I'll link both of those in the description below. This was a 60 cell tray that we rooted last year of some Carissa hollies. And because this tray is well made, I can just pick it up with one hand on one end like this. If I was using a flimsy tray that required a tray for the bottom of it, then I could only probably carry one at the time. But this way, it's easy for me to carry two at the time. These were rooted last summer, and we'll definitely be sticking some of these hollies like this. But you can see, I don't know how well you can see that, but they're very well rooted in here. I think this was a 60 cell tray, and I can only see 2 spots where one is missing. So we got 58 out of 60, which is a pretty good percentage on that. A couple other things you need to know about these materials. That 4 cubic foot bag of peat moss, this 4 cubic foot bag of perlite, and if I mix 1/3, or this is a 3 cubic foot bag of pine bark soil conditioner, that's probably about what I would mix. These 3 things together, we probably could get 80 to 100 flats out of that. So you probably don't need this kind of material if you're just going to do a few flats this summer. You can get a small bag of peat moss, a small bag of perlite, and a small bag of pine bark soil conditioner. The next thing I need to warn you about is perlite. Perlite is a volcanic glass that's been shattered at high temperature, and it always has a dust on it. So anytime you're working with it, you may want to get a mask and put it on. You really will have a coughing fit if you are in an enclosed space like I'm in now and start working with this material. I took a little bit out of the bag, and just that little bit, the dust is flying up in the air. So we'll always put on mask, and as we pour the perlite out, we'll actually hose the pile down. We do this on the floor. We'll empty a bag or 2 of peat moss and a bag or 2 of perlite on the floor, whatever other material we're mixing with it, and we'll actually hose it down, and somebody will have a shovel, everybody will have on mask, and we'll mix it up that way. It will really choke you up. So anyway, we have the 3 materials here, and we'll just mix them up well until we've got them, equally blended throughout. And this is the material that we'll use. Keep it dry. I said we'll hose it down to knock that dust down, but that's about all the hosing down of it I want to do, because I actually want it kind of loose. It's much, much easier to put it into the tray when it's loose like this. And we'll just fill our tray flush right to the top. I hope I mixed enough to do this. Looks like it's almost exactly the right amount. We'll get every single corner of this tray filled up. Just like that. Then I'll kind of shake it a bit, settle it in there. Okay, and that's how we'll do them. We'll do about 100, 150 flats at one time, and then we'll stack them up. Stick our cuttings in there as we go. We'll sometimes use a little nail or something to create the holes, depending on what we're sticking. Some stuff is sturdy enough that you can just stick it right in there. The main thing now is that peat moss is extremely dry in that bag, and so we've got to get it wet, and it will take us several times watering this flat. That peat moss will initially kind of reject water, so we'll have to take 6 or 8 of these flats at one time, and we'll put them on a cart, and we'll just hose them down, leave for 15 minutes, go work on some cuttings, come back to it, water it again. It'll take 2 or 3 times to initially get this soil moist. And then after that, it has an amazing ability to hold water, so we don't have to continually do that. I pointed out the rooting hormone, the dip and grow. The point of this is to burn the bottom of the cutting a little bit and create a callus, and that spot where that callus forms is where our roots will come from. We can actually root a lot of things without using this, but we definitely get superior roots and more roots coming from the bottom of it by burning it a little bit with this material. So that's the point of that, and we'll dilute this in water, and it kind of depends on what you're rooting at the time. You have to use a little bit more of this material if the wood is older or more firm. If it's very, very soft or softwood cuttings, we'll use a lot more water and a lot less dip and gray. I know I said I was going to take a break after this episode before we got started on rooted cuttings, but I realized there's still a lot of things to do on that hoop house, and there's actually a couple more things I want to do on those methods that I put in last week. I need to actually elevate those off the ground. If they sit on the ground like that, we'll have serious problems. And we have to build the end walls, and I think I have a very inexpensive solution for ventilation in that small hoop house. I've spent about $25, and I hope it's going to work. I actually think it's going to work, but I have a thermal switch that I'm going to use and a bathroom exhaust fan to exhaust that greenhouse. So I think that's going to work well, and I only had to spend about $25 to do it. I'll show you that on next week's episode. Then we'll take a break. But I'm not going to take a break from these Thursday series. I'm actually going to start a series for about 4 weeks on blueberries. The first episode of the blueberry series will be on how to pick blueberries for the area that you live in. We'll go through the different types of blueberries for different parts of the country. Then I'll discuss planting blueberries, pruning blueberries, fertilizing blueberries, and we'll just run about a 4-week series in the middle between this propagation series. And then as soon as we can get on propagating, we will, and I'll run that for as many weeks as that takes. I'm going to run that probably into the fall because I want you to see I make decisions later in the summer as things start to root on the irrigation and fertilizing at that point, and some additional things that we'll do to winterize as well. So a lot of things to come in this series and the blueberry series, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next Thursday. Thanks for watching.